Hello and welcome, my name is Coach Pav, and today I'm going to be talking about how you can effectively use cycling to burn or lose fat weight. So it's a common goal or desire through most people, especially my clients, anybody really, and the modern day amateur cyclist is probably carrying a little bit more fat weight than they would want to actually be carrying. And so what I tend to do with a lot of my clients is we factor this kind of training in around, building power, building endurance, whatever it is, make it goal specific. But what I want to do today is really make sure that you feel comfortable in being able to take away some of the information that I'm giving you and then employ it to yourself, because there's so many different methodologies. Not just in nutrition, which is an absolute minefield to get right, but also there's kind of a few different conflicting theories around what is the best intensity to train at for burning fat. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about methodology, what I think is best for people on a generic viewpoint. We're going to talk a little bit about nutrition, and then of course, if you know me, you know my a lot of my content, you'll know that it's very rare that I talk about a subject without shoehorning in something about mentality. So yes, I'm going to finish on why it is your mentality that is probably stopping you from losing weight. All right, so we're going to start with the methodology. Now, this is where it gets super tricky. Nutrition, funnily enough, is actually fairly easy once you know the training. Getting your nutrition right is a lot easier once you know how you should be approaching weight loss, fat loss. And the reason why the training is so complicated is because there is three very loud methodologies which are often promoted hand in hand by different personal trainers or stuff like classes like Zumba or spin class that promise these gains, and why they promise these gains and stuff like that, and weight loss gains or weight loss and making a decision around what is best to do is really hard. For me, there's two main factors that you should be looking at when you pick which methodology it is, and that's the time you have available and what your end goals are. So without going too much into that right now, I'm going to go through the main culprits. The biggest thing about this is to continue to approach it with an open mind, test things out. Some things will work, sometimes you fit into a certain category and it will work for you, sometimes it just doesn't work for you. You might have a body type. Ultimately, if this is really freaking you out and you're not seeing any gains, reach out to me. Happy to have a 15-minute free consultation. But back on the methodology. So the three main methodologies: that low intensity fat burning methodology for burning fat, high intensity, which is like your spinning classes, Zumbas, the stuff where essentially what they're telling you is you're going to spend 50 minutes to an hour absolutely balls out, like really going as hard as possible, and burn it like that. And then there's threshold training, which I will talk about, and that is probably the one that I'm going to recommend for almost everybody, but we'll come to that. I'm going to start with low intensity. Low intensity training is so old hat. I hate it. That's old saying, right? That to burn fat, you have to be in the fat burning zone. And there's some truth to that, because you will be burning fat in that zone. The problem is, or not necessarily the problem, but actually, if you increase the intensity, you're still burning fat. You burn pretty much exactly the same amount of fat up until you go super high intensity when you're just burning carbs. But at most aerobic intensity, you're going to have a mass amount that you can fuel by fat, and then as soon as you hit that, your carbs are going to kick in. So depending on what time you have available, you're probably going to notice or see that you might be able to get, you certainly burn more calories doing that, but whether or not that's sustainable is the big question here. So here's the thing: if you have more than 15 hours a week to burn to train, then you're probably better off sticking in that fat burning zone. Because as soon as you start to step up too high into that threshold area where you're burning a lot of carbohydrate, you're introducing too much stress, too much fatigue, and then you're eventually going to just end up cannibalizing muscles, probably because you're not going to be able to fuel as well enough, but also your performance is going to start to suffer. So yes, you will probably see weight loss, but no, it will not be the right type of weight loss, and your performance will suffer. So 15 around there or more hours a week, I recommend low intensity. However, I don't recommend low intensity. I would probably almost certainly be telling you to do a polarized approach whereby you spend 80% of your time low intensity burning fat, 20% of your time super high intensity, where actually you're going to burn an awful lot of calories too. You're also going to see impressive improvements on the bike. That is usually the best way to train for almost everybody who has a lot of time during their week to train. And on that note, we're going to talk about high intensity, because obviously I've segued into that. The reason why high intensity gets touted so much as the best way to lose fat, and they usually tell you it's because as soon as you've finished that session, you've boosted your metabolism and you're going to continue to burn calories the rest of the day. Probably true. It is true. In some respects, that is going to help. The biggest problem with that is you can't do that too many times during a week and expect to actually continue to see recovery and specific cycling performance improvements, which is why I would suggest that the only time when you were doing a lot of super high intensity work or some high intensity work is in tandem with low intensity. That way you are not going to be continually trying to recover from these high intensity sessions. You're going to, be in that group together. If you don't have 15 or more hours a week, I strongly recommend that you don't worry too much about that high intensity. You might have some of it. No harm in maybe one, maximum possibly 2 sessions per week. But the rest of your training time, as I said at the beginning, is going to be thresholds. So this is an approach which is going to maximize the amount of calories that you can burn in the time that you have, but also it's probably the best way to, for your efficiency in training time, the best way to spend your time. Because ultimately, if you've got 5 to 8 hours a week and you spend almost all of that at low intensity, you're just not going to see an adaptation which is worthwhile. Increasing that intensity is actually going to help you massively. So I think that 10 hours or less, I'm almost certainly going to suggest that you're doing a threshold-based training, some if not majority of your time. You've got that grey area, 10 to 15 hours. That's where I usually say you make a judgment call based on how you respond to that. And then 15 or more, low intensity polarized training where you're having some time at high intensity too. Of course, so there are some caveats to that, and that's why you should reach out to a coach if you're unsure about that, if you've tried it. Some people respond better to high intensity, some people respond better to low intensity. Again, there's going to be things around what you can eat and everything like that, which are going to also influence it. Provided that you've managed to navigate the how you should train and have an actual answer to that, your nutrition is going to be fairly easy. The biggest problem or challenge you might overcome is if you have a specific way you have to eat and you're trying to match your training to that, which is where I would recommend definitely working with a coach. If you're on something like the keto diet and you don't have 15 hours a week with keto, to be honest, you want to avoid that threshold where you're burning a lot of carbs or a lot of glucose and glycogen, because your body doesn't run like that. So you're probably looking at spending most of your time at low intensity with some short times at high intensity, which might not be the best for seeing cycling improvements. But if you're limited by the diet that you are eating, then that's what you have to do. It's not really wise or advisable. You're probably not going to get the gains by spending a huge amount of time at threshold if you're on keto diet. Similarly, if you have any intolerances or allergies that mean you have to stay away from certain food groups, that might be a reason. But nutrition, aside from that, doesn't have to be too difficult. Protein's super simple. I just recommend 20 to 30% of your intake is from protein. The more training you do, the more calories you eat, the lower that percentage is. Naturally, your body is going to figure out exactly what it has to do with the protein. So don't worry about, immediately after training or stuff like that. Just have a little calculation. You use MyFitnessPal or whatever, 20 to 30%. And then if you've watched my content a lot, you'll know that I'm a big fan of a plant-based diet, getting your micronutrients in. I'm not going to talk about that today, but there will be a link in the blog below or in the description for more information if you want to look at that. You definitely need to be eating a lot of fruit and vegetables. Vegetables is probably more wiser if you're trying to lose weight, to keep that sugar down, to make sure that your body is flushed full of the nutrients, which make it feel safe enough to shed that fat weight. Because if your body is in a state of shock or fear, we'll call it fear, it tends to want to hold that weight. So definitely look at that, and think about what that might look like around your training. And then periodize your nutrition to your training. If you are doing a threshold-based training, you probably want a high carbohydrate diet, low fat. And if you're doing the opposite, if you're doing that kind of polarized training, you might actually find that if you eat higher fat, lower carb, you will do well. The big thing is to consider it either or, carbs or fat. You're not going to get rid of either one completely. Keto, potentially, you will be very low. But if you're not doing keto, if you're just doing that, you are going to have some form of carbohydrate. Similarly, if you're having a high carbohydrate diet, you want some fats as well. Just because your body does need those, it's going to benefit from that. But periodize your nutrition to your training. That is the best way for you to be able to see, to really support your body, the training you're doing. You're going to see good improvements in training, and you're going to see weight loss too. And then lastly, as I said, my biggest love is mentality. Now, the reason some of you are going to be watching this and you're going to believe that you've done the training part, you've done the nutrition part, and you're still not losing weight. Here's the answer. It's probably because you are over fixating on losing weight. Our bodies do not respond to stress very well. And in that response, they tend to hold on to that fat weight. It's just genetic from when we were being chased around by other tribes and going winters without eating in some parts of the globe and stuff like that. So typically when we were stressed thousands of years ago, our bodies would hold on to fat weight, potentially burning down the muscle weight, to make us more efficient, to make sure that we can survive leaner periods without food. Obviously not really a problem for most of us right now. If you're watching this video, almost certainly isn't a problem. So the biggest problem is probably that you are just creating too much stress for your body to lose it. So if it sounds like that could be right, if you're constantly fixating, if you're jumping on the scales and you're always disappointed, put the scales away. Let's just get rid of that. Do everything that you can do. We want you to be in calorie deficit, of course. That's a big one. And you want to be doing the training, but just make sure we support it by de-stressing, relaxing, and really looking after our minds, because when we bring everything together, honestly, there's no reason why you wouldn't lose weight. So factor that in. If that's the biggest takeaway from this, just make sure that you are supporting your body, not just with the training and not just with the nutrition, but with your mentality too. And when you bring all of those together, you will lose weight. And that is it. I probably make it sound a lot more simple than it is. And if you are somebody that has been struggling, I completely empathize with you, and definitely reach out. Like, I'm happy to have a chat. 15-minute consultation time is absolutely free. If you need more, I can put a package together for you, and we can really look at a deep dive into why you're not losing weight and how you can do that, and how I can support you doing that. Similarly, if you want more information on some of the things I've talked about today, in the description on YouTube, I will post any link that is relevant to this topic. But similarly, head up coachpav.com, and you can find all my blogs there and have a little look through. If there's a question which I have not answered, feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to discuss that, create more content. But as ever, I really appreciate you watching and being here with me today. Please make sure to give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, share with your friends. Anything like that is greatly appreciated. Thanks. My name is Coach Pav. Have an awesome day.